Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be. Hello, it's Peter Zalum's Griniflix Adventure 8 and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about Leica and an unusual Leica 35mm Summicron f2 lens. It's an old vintage lens. Look at this little baby here. One of the original 35mm Summicron f2 lenses. How does that compare to the very latest, the 35mm APO? I'm going to be putting this lens on that camera. It's an unusual lens. It's got some extra lenses here for your Leica rangefinder camera. So that you can adjust the viewfinder so you can see the 35mm frame lines. It's only applicable for one type of viewfinder. I've got a couple of older Leicas here, and we'll see why this goggle arrangement fixed to the lens is relevant. It all started with the M3. This is an M3, and it was the rangefinder here is designed for a 50mm lens, and also for I think 75 and 135 or something like that. And if you put a wider lens than that on, then you need to have the goggle eyes so you can adjust the viewfinder to suit the wider frame of 35mm. So if I take off this collapsible 5cm, and you can see how this lens now is in front of the rangefinder, and then this also is in front of the rangefinder. And then when you look through it, then all of a sudden your 50mm frame lines that are normally in here in the viewfinder are made at more wide angle, so you can actually see the line of what the 35mm can actually produce, the line of sight. What's other unique about this particular lens? It's got what's called an infinity lock on it. So once you get to infinity on the focus here, you've got a little button. Let's see whether you can see there, but you have to sort of depress that button, and then you can take it off infinity, and then you can just focus normally with the thumb tag here, finger tag on the lens. And then when you get to the infinity mark, you might be able to hear the click. There you go. That was a click. Otherwise, it's all pretty straightforward. It's really compact lens. How does that compare to the APO 35? You can see it's a big difference. Okay, let's just take the lens hood off the APO here. Okay, I've got a filter on there. Just add a little bit, and you can see the difference in the size. So you can see the lens itself is really small. The goggles make it look really large. There is nearly dropped it. There is a version of this lens you can get, I think, after this lens was made, that didn't have this goggle arrangement attached to it. That lens will fit on my M10-R body or any new digital Leica body, and then it just fits on as per normal. The only thing to be aware of, if you do have a handle attached to this, even my camera case here that had a bit of a bump here for your fingers, you won't be able to put this lens on because these goggles interfere with the handle in most cases. When I put this lens on a modern camera, it still registers that this is a 35mm lens, so I get my correct viewing framing lines in the viewfinder. And what this particular lens does, it just accentuates the view even further, so it actually gives me even a wider angle view. I'll take some shots of my test patterns here, and then also go out in the field, take some shots as well. Then I'll be able to go jump into Lightroom and have a look at the photographs, see what you think. First shot, 1/8 of a second, f5.6 100 ISO, Success. Alright, f4, 15th of a second, same shot. I should probably check to see where the focus, no, focus is still there. Okay, what I might do is just stay there. 2.8, 1/30th of a second. Is there a little bit of movement in the focus at 2.8? Maybe there is, but anyway, I'll refocus. And then f2. Alright, so we'll be able to compare those two lenses with this shot. Ones in the red here are 35mm APO, and the ones in the yellow here are the vintage 35. f2, f2.8, f4 and f5.6. You can't believe these readings here because it's Lightroom interpreting the f-stop. And I think these are in reverse from that was 5.6, 4, 2.8 and 2. So if we take the two lots of 2, we can do a side-by-side comparison and see what we see. If we go straight to the center, and this is no surprise, the APO provides an outstanding detail. I think this is zooming in about 400%. Outstanding detail and fantastic definition and wonderful contrast between the lights and the dark. With the vintage lens, which is typical of vintage lenses, what I found anyway, when shooting wide open is that you start to lose the contrast quite a bit. Let's have a look at what happens when we start going towards the edges. If we go to the top edge, look, the vintage lens is doing quite well. It's actually got some quite good definition. If we look here, equidistant, yeah, it's not too bad. There is a slightly difference in the focal length. Both are rated at 35mm. However, the vintage lens is slightly wider than the APO. So which one is 35 and which one's bigger or smaller? I'm not entirely sure, but they're both similar range. Now across to the right somewhere. Anyway, so that's what it looks like at the corners. And if we go to the other corner here, what do we see here? All in all, at f2, the vintage lens I think stacks up quite well. I mean, the APO has more detail, it is more consistent, more contrast. And at the corners there, look here, you can see some flare coming up on the vintage lens, whereas the APO controls that quite well. Alright, well that's at f2. What's it look like at 2.8? And already the vintage lens is starting to look better. As soon as you go away from wide open and stop down a bit, you actually start increasing the contrast. And you start picking up the definition as well. In both cases, APO is better. Come across here to the side somewhere. Yeah, as you would expect, the APO is better. But look, the vintage lens stacks up really well. It actually does a really good job, I think. Come back down here to the corner. There's the APO, nice and clear. Let's have a look at 4. 4 here and there. F4, and we're zooming in, and really it's hard to tell. Oh, I suppose they're still a little bit different. Clarity's good. APO is better. Moving across, yeah, the APO is better than the vintage lens. Have a look down the corner here. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure whether there is a curvature in the focus point on the vintage lens, whereas the APO seems to be more straight right across the frame of view here. Okay, and the last one, we'll go have a look at 5.6. What do I have? 2, 2.8, 5.4 and 5.6. Yeah, so these are both at 5.6. And at 5.6 we got a nice, great definition, great contrast, great clarity. Both lenses stack up really well at 5.6 as you would expect. APO a bit better towards the edges, which is what I was expecting again. If we go, say, over here to the side, the APO is clearer. If we go to the other side, the APO is clearer again. If we go down to the Hasselblad here, we've got a clearer image in the corner, which is what I was expecting. But when we go here, where the subject is a bit closer, you can see how all of a sudden the vintage lens picks up that better. Alright, I think that's okay. So then what we'll do is we'll go out in the field. I'm expecting similar results. If I'm shooting wide open, then I'm going to have better contrast with the APO compared to the vintage lens, but it'll be interesting to see what sort of shots we get. Sure does look weird, doesn't it? Having these goggled-eyed lens on the Leica M10-R. Anyway, I'm here at McMaster's Beach again, and I'll go for a walk up around the headland there, take some shots of stuff, and then I'll do the same. Or maybe I've got my APO with me as well, APO 35, and I'll take some shots with that as well. And then we can have a look at what real life shots look like with the two lenses in Lightroom, do some editing, things like that. Right, these first sequences shot, I've taken a number of f-stops, f2 and then f2.8 and then f4 on the vintage lens, just to see what sort of impact there is on the image. But other than my exposure settings, it's hard to tell them apart. At 2.8, no, at f2, it does give you some nice bokeh, quite a good definition as well. In these extreme conditions of lighting, there's the APO, and yes, you do notice a little bit of contrast difference. The APO has a lot of detail, so even when we zoom right in, we just got brilliant definition. But the vintage lens is doing a great job. So these next sequence of shots are the APO. Again, so much detail there, both at wide open as well as stopped down. Yes, very impressed with APO, of course. And the close-up function on the APO makes a big difference as well. You can take some interesting shots. Yeah, so there's the APO, and I've taken a similar shot with the vintage lens. Is there much difference? Yes, you do still notice a bit of difference in the contrast, but as far as details get concerned, loads of detail, including this shot here. Yes, well, anyway, well, I hope you liked this video. If you have, then give it a thumbs up. That's how you support the channel. If it's the first time to my channel, then please do subscribe, press notifications. You'll be notified when the next video is out. Do you shoot vintage lenses on your equipment, whether it be Leica or anything else? Let me know. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.